Lisa Robinson never expected that a simple act of kindness would turn her entire world upside down. She was just doing what felt right, just helping someone who needed it. But the next morning, when military vehicles rolled up outside Daisy's diner and uniformed officers stepped inside, the entire restaurant fell silent. The air grew thick with tension as a tall officer scanned the room before locking eyes on her. "We're looking for Lisa Robinson," he announced. Lisa froze. Her heart pounded. The customers whispered among themselves. Mr. Willis, the diner's owner, looked at her in confusion. She had no idea what was happening. Who were these men? Why were they here for her? And most importantly, who was that homeless man she had helped the night before? Before we dive into this unbelievable story, tell us, have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Comment below and subscribe for more gripping stories. Lisa's breath hitched as every pair of eyes in the diner turned toward her. The officer's voice still echoed in her ears. "We're looking for Lisa Robinson." She wiped her hands on her apron, trying to steady her nerves. The last time she had seen military officers in uniform was at her father's funeral. Why were they here now? Just the night before, she had paid for a meal for a homeless man, an act so small it barely registered in her mind. Now, standing in the middle of Daisy's diner with military men watching her, she began to question everything. She glanced at Mr. Willis, the diner's owner, who was standing behind the counter, his eyes darting between her and the officers. The regulars had stopped eating, their forks hovering in the air. The diner, usually filled with the clinking of plates and the hum of casual conversation, was dead silent. Lisa Robinson was 28 years old, with deep brown skin and kind eyes that carried both warmth and exhaustion. She had worked at Daisy's diner for 5 years, serving coffee with a smile even when she barely had the energy to stand. Life had never been easy, but she pushed through. She had dreams, big ones. She wanted to become a nurse, to help people beyond just serving meals. But money was always tight, and between rent, bills, and her mother's medical expenses, nursing school felt like a distant dream. The diner itself was small but welcoming, with red leather booths and checkered floors that had seen better days. The neon sign outside flickered every few minutes, casting a soft blue glow onto the sidewalk. It was a place where truckers, locals, and the occasional out-of-towner stopped for a warm meal and a little bit of conversation. Lisa had seen her fair share of people passing through, but she remembered the homeless man from last night vividly. He had walked in just before closing, his steps slow and weary. His clothes were tattered, his gray hair unkempt, and his face, though lined with age, held a quiet dignity. He sat in the corner booth, clutching the menu but never ordering. Something about him had pulled at Lisa's heart. Maybe it was the way he hesitated to meet anyone's eyes, or the way his fingers trembled as he reached for his glass of water. She had seen that kind of exhaustion before, the kind that went beyond hunger. It was the weight of the world pressing down on someone's shoulders. When she realized he wasn't going to order, she made a decision. Using her own tip money, she covered the cost of his meal. She had expected him to refuse, maybe even argue. Instead, he had simply looked at her, his eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. "I don't deserve this," he had whispered. Lisa had smiled, brushing off his words. Everyone deserves kindness. She hadn't thought about it again after he left, but now, as the military officer stood before her, she realized that maybe, just maybe, There was more to that man than she had assumed. The officer in front of her cleared his throat, snapping her back to reality. "Lisa Robinson?" he asked again, his tone firm but not unkind. Lisa swallowed hard and nodded. "That's me." Whatever was about to happen next, she had no choice but to face it. Lisa's heart pounded as the officer's sharp gaze locked onto hers. The entire diner was watching, waiting for an explanation. She wiped her damp hands against her apron, forcing herself to speak. "Yes, I'm Lisa Robinson." Her voice was steady, but inside she was anything but calm. The officer, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, took a step closer. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight. He wasn't just any soldier, he was someone with authority. The patch on his sleeve bore the emblem of the United States Army. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was firm, but there was no aggression in his tone. Lisa's stomach twisted. What could they possibly want with her? Had she done something wrong? She glanced at Mr. Willis, who stood frozen behind the counter, his usual smug expression replaced with uncertainty. The diner was eerily silent, the air thick with tension. The regulars sat still, their eyes darting between Lisa and the military men. I don't understand," Lisa admitted. She had spent the last 5 years serving coffee and flipping burgers, nothing that should warrant a military visit. The officer exhaled, his expression unreadable. "It's about the man you helped last night." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. The homeless man. The one who barely spoke. The one she had fed without a second thought. Her mind raced. Had something happened to him? Is he okay? She asked quickly, her voice laced with concern. The officer hesitated before answering. "We'll explain everything, but we need you to come with us." Lisa's pulse quickened. The way he said it wasn't a request. It was an order. Mr. Willis suddenly found his voice. "Now wait a minute," he said, stepping out from behind the counter. "What exactly is going on here? Lisa's one of my best workers. If she's in some kind of trouble, I think we all deserve to know why." The officer turned to him, his expression unreadable. "She's not in trouble, but this is a sensitive matter." Lisa clenched her fists. The uncertainty was eating her alive. She hated not knowing. She hated the way everyone was looking at her like she was a criminal. She needed answers. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "Okay, I'll go with you." The moment she said it, the tension in the room thickened. Some customers exchanged uneasy glances. Others whispered among themselves. Mr. Willis shook his head. "Lisa, I don't think—" "I'll be fine," she interrupted. "I just want to know what's going on." One of the soldiers stepped aside, motioning for her to follow. The diner doors swung open, revealing the row of military vehicles parked outside. The sight sent a ripple of unease through Lisa's chest. This wasn't normal. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, a cool breeze brushed against her skin, but it did nothing to calm her racing heart. She turned back for one last glance at the diner. The customers were still staring, frozen in their seats. Mr. Willis stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. He looked worried, not something Lisa had seen often. The officer gestured toward one of the vehicles. "Please, get in." Lisa hesitated for only a second before climbing inside. The door shut behind her with a firm click. As the car pulled away from the diner, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening was bigger than she could possibly imagine. She turned to the officer beside her. "Please," she said, "just tell me. Who is he? Who was that? Man?" The officer finally looked at her, his expression solemn. "Lisa, that man isn't just a homeless veteran. He's someone the military's been searching for a long time." Lisa's breath hitched. What had she gotten herself into? Lisa's stomach tightened as the military vehicle rumbled down the road, carrying her away from the familiar streets of her small town. She sat stiffly, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat. The officer beside her, the one who had asked for her by name, remained silent for a few moments before finally speaking. "Lisa, the man you helped last night, his name is Henry Whitaker. He's not just any veteran. He's a former Special Forces officer. He was declared missing nearly a decade ago." Lisa's eyes widened. Missing? She struggled to process the words. She had seen Henry barely able to hold his cup of water. He had looked like a man forgotten by the world. But now they were telling her he was someone the military had been searching for? Missing? Lisa repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand. Why was he homeless? If he was so important, why didn't anyone find him before?" The officer, who had introduced himself as Captain Reynolds, sighed. His gaze flickered toward the passing buildings outside the window. "That's what we're trying to figure out. Henry Whitaker was one of the most skilled soldiers we had. But after his last deployment, something changed. He came back, different. Then, one day, he vanished. No contact, no trace. Until now." Lisa's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Henry had sat in her diner just last night, alone, defeated. He had refused to meet anyone's eyes. And yet, now, an entire military unit was looking for him. "Why are you here for me?" Lisa asked, her voice firmer this time. "I just gave him a meal. That's all." Captain Reynolds turned his gaze to her, his expression unreadable. "That meal might have changed everything. We don't know why he resurfaced. Now, after all these years, but we do know one thing. He spoke about you." Lisa blinked. "What?" "When we found him this morning, he wouldn't talk to us," Captain Reynolds explained. "But he did say one name, Lisa Robinson, and then he said something that stopped us in our tracks." Lisa swallowed hard. "What did he say?" Reynolds leaned forward slightly. He said, "Tell Lisa, I remember now." Lisa's entire body went still. She had no idea what that meant. Remember what? What connection could she possibly have to this man beyond that one night? The car slowed, and Lisa realized they were approaching a secure military base. The tall gates loomed ahead, guarded by armed officers. The vehicle rolled to a stop, and before she knew it, the door was opened for her. Lisa hesitated, but Captain Reynolds gave her a reassuring nod. "Come on, there's someone who wants to see you." Stepping out of the car, Lisa's legs felt like lead. She had never been inside a military base before, and now she was being escorted like she was part of something much bigger than herself. Soldiers moved efficiently in the background, but Lisa barely noticed. Her mind was stuck on one thing: Henry. Inside the facility, Lisa was led down a long hallway until they stopped in front of a room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the opening she could see him. Henry. He was sitting at a plain table, his hands resting on his lap. He looked different, cleaner, wearing fresh clothes, but his eyes still held that haunted look she had seen the night before. The moment he saw Lisa, something in his face softened. Lisa stepped inside cautiously. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Henry," she said gently. He took a deep breath, his fingers trembling, slightly. "Lisa, I don't know how to explain this, but last night was the first time in years that I felt human." Lisa frowned. "What do you mean?" Henry looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was lost. My mind. It wasn't my own. I didn't remember who I was. All I knew was that I was tired, hungry, alone." He lifted his gaze, meeting hers. "But when you helped me, something clicked. Something inside me woke up." Lisa felt a lump form in her throat. She had no idea what to say. Henry continued, "I didn't just wander into your diner by accident, Lisa. I think I was supposed to find you." Lisa's breath caught. "Why?" He hesitated before speaking again. "Because I knew your father." Lisa's heart stopped. "What?" she whispered. "Your father, David Robinson. We served together. He saved my life once." Lisa's hands clenched the edge of the table. Her father had died when she was a child. She had heard stories about his bravery, but she had never known much about his time in the military. "Your father talked about you all the time," Henry continued. "He kept a picture of you in his pocket, said you were his greatest reason to come home. When he didn't make it back, something inside me broke." His voice cracked. "I lost myself after that. I couldn't face the world anymore." Lisa felt tears sting her eyes. She had spent her whole life longing to know more about her father. And now, sitting across from her was a man who had fought beside him, a man who had been lost in his own way. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "Why now? Why did you come back?" Henry exhaled slowly. "Because you reminded me of him, Lisa. The way you helped me without asking for anything. The way you looked at me like I was still a person, not just another lost cause." A heavy silence filled the room. Lisa wiped at her damp cheeks, overwhelmed by everything she had just heard. Captain Reynolds finally spoke. "Henry wanted to make sure you knew the truth about your father, and we wanted to make sure Henry got the help he needed." Lisa turned to Henry, her voice thick with emotion. "What happens now?" Henry gave her a small, weary smile. "Now, I start over, and it's all because of you." Lisa had never expected her life to change overnight, but one simple act of kindness had brought a forgotten soldier home, and in return, she had finally found a piece of the father she had lost. Lisa sat still, absorbing Henry's words. The weight of everything he had just revealed pressed down on her. Her father, David Robinson, had saved Henry's life. And, in some way, her small act of kindness had saved him again. The room was thick with emotion as Lisa tried to find the right words. Before she could speak, Captain Reynolds stepped forward and placed a small envelope on the table between them. "Henry wanted you to have this," he said softly. Lisa hesitated, then reached for the envelope with slightly trembling fingers. The paper was worn, its edges slightly frayed, as if it had been carried for years. Carefully, she opened it and pulled out a folded letter. Her breath caught when she saw the handwriting. Neat, deliberate strokes, aged by time. It was addressed to her. As she unfolded the letter, Henry's voice broke the silence. "Your father wrote that before his last deployment. He asked me to give it to you if he didn't make it back." Lisa's heart clenched. She had never received anything from her father before. She had grown up with only distant memories and faded photographs. But now, right in her hands was something he had left for her. Words meant just for her. Her eyes scanned the first line and instantly tears welled up. "My sweet Lisa, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't come home. And for that, I am so sorry. But I need you to know something. You are, and will always be, my greatest pride." Her throat tightened as she kept reading. "I may not be there to see you grow, but I know you'll be strong, just like your mother. And if life ever gets too heavy, I want you to remember this. Kindness is your greatest strength. Even when the world seems unkind, never stop believing in the power of a good heart." Lisa wiped her tears with the back of her hand. She could barely breathe. Her father's words, written so long ago, felt like they had traveled through time just to reach her at this very moment. Henry watched her closely, his own eyes filled with unspoken emotions. "He always believed in you, Lisa. And last night, when you helped me, I saw him in you." Captain Reynolds stepped forward again, clearing his throat. "There's something else." He gestured toward another officer who entered the room carrying a small, locked box. He placed it on the table in front of Lisa. "This was found among Henry's belongings when we picked him up. We believe it's connected to your father." Lisa looked at Henry for confirmation. He nodded. "Open it." With shaky hands, Lisa unlatched the box. Inside, nestled between carefully folded fabric, was a military medal, one she had only seen in history books. It was the Distinguished Service Cross, one of the highest honors a soldier could receive. Beside it was a photograph, yellowed with age, of two young soldiers standing side by side, her father and Henry. They looked so full of life, their arms draped over each other's shoulders, laughing at some private joke. Lisa traced the edge of the medal with her fingers. "Why? Why do you have this?" she asked. Henry took a deep breath. "Your father earned this for saving his entire unit, but he never got the chance to receive it. After he passed, I kept it, hoping that one day I'd be strong enough to find you and give it to you myself." His voice broke slightly. "But I wasn't strong. I let grief and guilt bury me. I lost my way." Lisa's chest ached. She couldn't imagine the pain Henry had carried all these years. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You didn't lose your way," she said softly. "You just needed someone to remind you who you are." A heavy silence filled the room, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of healing, of pieces finally falling into place. Lisa had spent years wondering about her father, wishing for just one more connection to him. And now, because of one simple act of kindness, she had found it. Captain Reynolds straightened his posture. "Henry will be taken to a proper facility where he can get the help he needs. He has a long road ahead, but he won't be alone anymore." Lisa nodded, still holding the medal in her hand. "And me?" Reynolds smiled. "Henry has one more request." He turned to the older man. "Tell her." Henry took a deep breath. "Lisa, your father wanted you to have every opportunity in life. He believed in you, in your dreams. So, I set up a fund. It's not much, but it's enough to help you get through nursing school." Lisa gasped. "What?" Henry smiled. "You spent your last dollars making sure I had a meal. Now, it's my turn to make sure you have a future." Tears streamed down Lisa's face. She had never expected anything in return for that meal, but in giving kindness, she had received more than she ever could have imagined. The past had finally come full circle, and for the first time in her life, Lisa truly felt her father's presence. Lisa sat in stunned silence, Henry's words still ringing in her ears. The man who had once been lost, a forgotten soldier wandering the streets, had just given her something she never imagined, a chance to fulfill her dreams. The weight of her father's medal in her hand felt heavier now, not because of its physical presence, but because of what it represented. Her father's sacrifice, Henry's struggles, and the power of one small act of kindness that had changed everything. Henry's weathered face softened with a gentle smile. "Your father once saved my life, Lisa. I spent years thinking I could never repay that debt. But then I realized, kindness doesn't work like that. It's not about owing or repaying. It's about passing it forward. And you reminded me of that." Lisa's throat tightened as she tried to hold back more tears. She had never thought much about what she did that night at the diner. To her, it was simple. A hot meal for a man in need. But to Henry, it had been the moment that pulled him back from the edge of despair. Captain Reynolds cleared his throat, breaking the emotional silence. "Lisa, the military is ensuring that Henry gets the help he needs. He'll have a place to stay, access to counseling, and the support of his fellow soldiers. He's not alone anymore." Lisa nodded, feeling a deep sense of relief. Henry had spent years fading into the background of society, but now he was being brought back into the fold, where he belonged. The following day, Lisa returned to Daisy's diner, the place where everything had begun. As soon as she walked in, the diner fell silent. Customers who had seen the military vehicles the day before turned to her, curiosity and concern in their eyes. Mr. Willis stood behind the counter, his usual frown replaced with something that almost looked like respect. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and stepped forward. "Well," he asked, raising an eyebrow, "you gonna tell us what the hell that was all about?" Lisa let out a small chuckle, shaking her head. How could she possibly explain everything? Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph of her father and Henry, placing it on the counter. "It was about this," she said simply. Mr. Willis leaned in, squinting at the photo. Slowly, realization dawned on his face. "That's your old man, isn't it?" Lisa nodded. "And that man I helped? He was his friend, his brother in arms. He was lost. And now he's found." The diner was quiet for a moment before one of the regulars, an elderly man who always sat by the window, cleared his throat. "You did a good thing, Lisa." Another customer nodded. "Not many people would do what you did." Lisa smiled. "It wasn't much, just a meal." Mr. Willis let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his bald head. "Maybe. But it was enough." And for the first time since Lisa had started working at the diner, he gave her a genuine nod of approval. Days turned into weeks, and Lisa found herself adjusting to the reality of what had happened. She visited Henry at the rehabilitation center, where he was slowly rebuilding his life. Each time she saw him, he looked stronger, more at peace. He still had a long road ahead, but he wasn't walking it alone anymore. One afternoon, she received a phone call from a bank representative. "Ms. Robinson, we wanted to confirm that the Henry Whitaker Veterans Fund has successfully transferred the initial amount into your education account." Lisa blinked in shock. "I'm sorry. The what?" The representative continued. the Scholarship Fund. It was established in your name and funded by multiple anonymous donors, including a personal contribution from Mr. Whitaker himself. It's enough to cover your nursing school tuition in full. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She had dreamed of nursing school for so long, but money had always been the obstacle. Now, because of Henry, because of a single meal on a quiet night at the diner, her future had changed forever. That evening, she visited Henry again. As soon as she stepped into his room, she held up the bank statement. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Henry chuckled. "I told you. I just passed the kindness forward." Lisa shook her head in disbelief, her eyes misty with gratitude. "Henry, I don't know how to thank you." He patted her hand gently. "Just promise me one thing." Lisa leaned forward. "Anything." Henry's smile was small but full of meaning. "Keep being the person your father would be proud of. And never stop believing in the power of kindness." Lisa nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I promise." The next day she stood in front of her father's grave, holding the Distinguished Service Cross in her hands. The cemetery was quiet, the wind rustling softly through the trees. She placed the medal at the base of the headstone, her fingers lingering on the engraved name. "I found him, Dad," she whispered, "and because of him, I found a piece of you, too." A deep sense of peace settled over her. She knew now that kindness had a way of coming full circle. Sometimes the smallest actions created the biggest ripples, and sometimes a single meal could change more than just one life. As she walked away, she smiled to herself, already thinking about the future. Her journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. As Lisa walked away from her father's grave, a sense of peace settled deep within her heart. The weight she had carried for years, the unanswered questions about her father, the struggle of making ends meet, the uncertainty of her future, had shifted. She had found closure in the most unexpected way. Through one simple act of kindness, she had not only helped a man in need, but had also uncovered a part of her past she never thought she'd know. Henry was no longer just a homeless veteran. He was a survivor, a man who had lost his way but found a reason to move forward again. And in turn, he had given Lisa the future she had once thought was out of reach. The power of kindness had come full circle, proving that even the smallest gestures could lead to the most extraordinary changes. This story is a reminder that kindness is never wasted. You never know what someone is going through, and sometimes one small act can change a life forever. So, tell us, have you ever seen kindness make a difference in someone's life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more inspiring stories, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching. And remember, kindness has the power to change the world. See you in the next story.